So we're in a question series, and I've been trying to field some of your questions. And the funny thing about a question series is I have no idea where the questions are going to go. And they come from all over the place, come from people of different ages, people of different backgrounds, but they come from you. And so we've been dealing with some of the questions that have come in. Questions sometimes can be a real obstacle in our faith. You're moving along in a project, you're doing a project, okay? And as you're doing this project, you're moving along and it's working out fine, and then you come up against an obstacle. And now you've got to deal with that obstacle or you can't continue to move forward. The project kind of comes to a grinding halt until that obstacle is overcome in some way. You find a way around it or through it or under it, whatever. And so it is sometimes with our questions when it comes to faith. We have to deal with some of the deep questions and try to at least get some resolution on those. So today, we're going to look at two questions. The first question came in, and the wording is something like this. We see what seems to be the absence of signs and wonders and miracles in our lives and in the world around us when compared with what happened in the Scriptures. So where did the miracles go? Great question. Signs and wonders and miracles. You read the Bible and you would think it was every day, right? You would think every day there was some kind of a miraculous thing that took place because there's so much supernatural, right? It's God and it's the work of God. But most of the Bible isn't about that supernatural moment that we see glimpses of here and there. Yes, those stories are there, and they're important for us, but that's not the norm. Think about the Israelites who were slaves in Egypt for 600 years. There they are for 600 years. God, where are you? God, we can't find you. God, have you abandoned us? God, we give our lives to you. Come save us. For 600 years, they waited, hoping that God would come. So we have these moments in time, though, that Moses comes along and he performs these incredible miracles, these wonders. And we see Elijah and Elisha. And then we see Jesus. And Jesus comes along with miracles that take it to a whole new level. But think about the Psalms for just a second. The Psalms, about half of the Psalms are these stories of these people seeking God. They're looking for God to rescue them. They're remembering these times of old when God interceded and intervened in a powerful way. God came miraculously, but they're looking back at those and singing about them and remembering and hoping that someday the God who did that for them will do that for us. So today we're going to be actually all through the Bible today, but we're going to start in the Gospel according to John, my favorite book, Gospel according to John, chapter 3, verse 1. And we see Jesus. He comes along and he's doing miracles, and the power of God is on Jesus like nobody ever before him and nobody who will ever come after him. Why? Because he's the Son of God. He's God himself. And so the power for him, it's like breathing. John 3:1. There was a man named Nicodemus, a Jewish religious leader who was a Pharisee. After dark one evening, he came to speak with Jesus. Rabbi, he said, we all know that God has sent you to teach us. Your miraculous signs are evidence that God is with you. So here we have Nicodemus, this well-respected Pharisee who's saying the power of God is on you. You are doing these miraculous works like nobody we have ever seen. We can see that you came from God. We see the hand of God is on you. There's something about those miracles that he did that separates him from everybody else. I read a story not long ago about a pastor in Zambia. His name was James Sakara, 22 years old, claimed to be a pastor and a prophet. Anytime somebody claims to be a prophet, I get nervous. Oh, you're a prophet, are you? So he claimed to be a pastor. He was a pastor, but he claimed to be a prophet. And he decided somewhere along the line that he was going to try to be resurrected like Jesus. And so he had 3 of his followers tie him up hand and foot and bury him. He said, in 3 days, dig me up and God will raise me from the dead. 3 days came and 3 days went, and his followers came and they dug him up. And guess what happened? He was dead. He was dead. He was interpreting the passage that when we take communion, do this in remembrance of me. He was interpreting that to not be just about taking the elements, the bread and the juice. He said, basically, do this in remembrance of me means you can die and come back to life just like I did. There's danger when you take the scriptures out of context. It could get you killed. In his case, it did. And he left behind a young wife who was pregnant. Two of the followers who buried him turned themselves into authorities. The third one went on the run. I haven't heard what had happened to him in the end. There came a moment when the religious leaders who had seen Jesus do so much, they came to him and said, prove to us the authority by which you make all these incredible claims. I mean, do a miracle so we can believe that you actually are who you claim to be, or you have the authority to say the things that you say. And so they came to him demanding that. Oh, there I am. Matthew 16, verse 2. He replied, you know the saying, the red sky at night means fair weather tomorrow. Red sky in the morning means foul weather all day. You know how to interpret the weather signs in the sky, but you don't know how to interpret the signs of the times. Only an evil, adulterous generation would demand a miraculous sign, but the only sign I will give them is the sign of the prophet Jonah. And Jesus left them and went away. They demanded a sign, and Jesus says, no, I'm not going to give you a sign. The only thing I'm giving you is what Jonah gave. All Jonah did was preach. After he got spit out by the fish, he preached. He didn't do a miraculous signs. So, miracles. Let's talk about that for just a quick second. Most miracles are undocumented. Most of the miraculous things that happen around us are in the corners and in the quiet. And nobody is filming when a miracle happens most of the time. If you have been exposed to anything miraculous, you probably have had more exposure to miracles than almost everybody in the scriptures. Remember Moses, he was 80 years old before he experienced his first miracle. He's out tending sheep, and there's this bush that's on fire, and it's not burning up. This is a miracle. He's 80 years old before he saw his first miracle. And so miraculous things are not common. They're uncommon. And it could be the miraculous things are happening all around us all the time, but we're not catching wind of it. Nobody's telling us the story. There were times that Jesus would do a miracle, and then he'd say, but don't tell anybody. Go and be clean, but don't tell anybody. Go show yourself to the priest, but don't tell them it was me that did it, or that type of thing. And so Jesus was telling people, be quiet about this miracle. It's just for you. Most miracles probably go unnoticed. And we might even receive a miracle and kind of be unaware that a miracle happened, or be standing close by proximity where a miracle is taking place. Think about the people that Jesus did miracles to, and other people were walking past and didn't notice what was happening. That kind of thing can happen all the time. I have told this story before, and I'm going to tell two stories that I've told before. And if you've been going here for the last 13 years, you may have heard this story once, twice, or 5 times. But it's part of my story. And I have a miracle that happened to me when I was young, and it was foundational for me. I was a little kid, and I was afraid of the dark. So some of you know the story. You could get up and tell it. Why don't you come up and tell it for me? No, just kidding. I was afraid of the dark. And there was a powerful thunderstorm hit in their tiny little town, Dayton, Pennsylvania. Tiny little town. Power is out, and it's dark, and I'm afraid. And I say to my mom, I'm afraid. My mom says, why don't you pray? And I prayed. Something like, God, please turn on the lights. And in an instant, the lights came on. Now, what I didn't know was our little block where our house is the only block that had power all night long. The rest of the town was dark, but that little block where I lived, the scared little boy who was afraid of the dark, that little block had lights all night long. Why would God do that? Why would God do a miracle for some little kid who's afraid of the dark? Why would he do that for me? And in some ways, it's very foundational. Boy, I hope we each get more than one miracle, because if I used my miracle up when I was a little kid afraid of the dark, I'd like it back. I'd like to do another one, right? I'd like God. But anyway, why? Why would God do a miracle for a little kid? And most miracles are probably like that. Quiet little miracles for somebody who needed it in the moment. So I asked the guys on Thursday morning at our Test for Echo. We have a group that meets 7 a.m. Carrie Rand typically makes yummy coffee. We sit around and we talk about what I'm going to preach about on Sunday. And I asked the guys, have you guys seen a miracle? Almost all of the men in the circle said, yeah, actually I have. Almost all of them said, here's what happened and here's what happened. Most of them have experienced a miracle of some kind in their lives. So we can wonder, what happened to all the miracles that played out in Scripture? But the reality is, there are miracles happening around us all the time. But most of them are silent miracles that we're missing. Question 2. The Bible says in several places that we should fear God. What does that look like? Especially when we know that He loves us and died for us and is working for our good. Fear God. It's such a good question because this idea of fearing God, there's this dynamic, there's this tension. We're supposed to fear God and trust God at the same time. Well, how do you trust somebody that you fear? How do you trust a God that you're afraid of? Fear God and trust God. Proverbs 1, verse 7 tells us, fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. So, fear of the Lord, it's the basis, the foundation of knowledge, of understanding God and life and everything. So we should fear Him. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. Deuteronomy 10, another passage that talks about fearing the Lord. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? He requires only that you fear the Lord your God and live in a way that pleases Him and love Him and serve Him with all your heart and soul. And you must always obey the Lord's commands and decrees that I am giving you today for your own good. So, are we to serve God out of fear? Is it possible to be terrified of God and love Him at the same time? Is that even a possible thing? It's a dynamic that's kind of hard to wrestle with as we try to think that through. If a parent is abusive to their child and the child is fearful of the parent, does the child really love the parent? It's a hard thing. I've never experienced that. But I would imagine it is possible to love somebody who's been cruel to you. But God is not an abusive parent. It's not who God is. It's not the way it plays out. But sometimes we try to interpret life through those kinds of lenses. Sometimes people use fear tactics to try to get a salvation. Get you to make a commitment to Jesus. Scare the hell out of you. That's what they say. I don't talk like that. But they try to scare you so that you will love Jesus. And those tactics can work for a while, but most often statistics have shown us that most people who have come to Jesus out of fear tend to come to terms with that at some point and say, yeah, actually, I was manipulated. I was scared into faith. And then they walk away. Now, I don't think that's always the case, but statistics do show that that is pretty typical. God isn't an abusive parent. So the Hebrew word for fear doesn't say terror. You're supposed to be terrified of God as much as it means to have the deepest respect and awe and admiration, adoration. Side note, pastors are called reverend, revered one. I think that's weird. Are you supposed to revere? No, but we're supposed to have reverence for God and God alone. Revere God. He is the one that we look to and we fear, but we fear him in awe and adoration and respect. Webster Dictionary defines reverence. This idea of fear is reverence. It defines it as a profound respect mingled with love, devotion, and awe. Deuteronomy 10:20, you must fear the Lord. You must hold in reverence, in great reverence. You must fear, hold in great reverence the Lord your God and worship him and cling to him. Your oaths must be in his name alone. He alone is your God. Why? Because he is the only one who is worthy of your praise, the one who has done these mighty miracles that you have seen with your own eyes. Back to miracles, right? One of my favorite stories in all the Bible comes from the Gospel according to Mark. It's in chapter 4. And we see Jesus is by the seashore, and a huge crowd. Mark tells us it's a massive crowd has come out to hear him teach and preach. And they've come out looking for healing, all of this. And so Jesus, seeing the crowd gathered, and he's right there by the water's edge, he goes into a boat, and he sits down in the boat, and he begins to teach them. And if you look at Mark 4, you see all of the various lessons, the parables that he used to teach them as he sat there in the boat, and there's a bunch of them. And that's probably just the start. Who knows how long Jesus taught them as he sat there in the boat, or what other incredible things he did as he sat there. He may have healed people. He may have done so much. We don't know. But it could have been hours that he sat there teaching these people who had gathered there on the seashore. And now it's the end of the day, and the sun is starting to set, and he's exhausted. He's poured himself out. They say preaching takes a lot out of you. I don't know what that's about. But he's preaching potentially for hours. We have no idea. And people are receiving the stories, and Mark is jotting them down, and the other Gospels are jotting down all of these teachings, these parables. Now we're in Mark 4, verse 35. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we are going to drown?" All right, anybody here a deep sleeper? Raise your hand. Anybody who can sleep through a sermon? Actually, I could probably be a better judge of that one. You got to be a deep sleeper to be laying. He's exhausted. He's poured himself out. But to be laying in the back of the boat, and it's getting tossed in the waves. And these guys, some of them are fishermen. Peter, Andrew, James, John. These are fishermen. They know water. They know when the seas get dangerous, right? They know how to ride out the storm. But here they are in the boat, and it's terrifying. It's scary. And they're frightened. And Jesus is asleep, head on a cushion, rocking back and forth. Water is coming over the sides of the boat. He's getting wet, and he's sleeping through it. I can't imagine. And they wake him up. "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" there's a tremendous sense of panic in the voices and in the hearts of his disciples. Don't you care? We are going to drown out here. Have you ever found yourself in a place that you were afraid of this? You're afraid of this, and then something else happens and you realize, actually, I shouldn't have been afraid of that. I should be afraid of this. Have you ever been there? I'm afraid of this, and then the situation changes quickly and you're afraid of something greater. It's happened to me many times. Again, I'm going to share one more story that I've told you a bunch of times, and I can't help it. It's my story. But this was August 18th, 2015. And we had gone on vacation in the North Cascades National Park. And there we were on vacation, and there was a fire across the road from the campground we were staying in. A lightning strike had hit, and there was a little fire going, and my son noticed this fire even as we pulled in, but the rangers weren't worried about it. It was a natural lightning strike. It'll burn itself out. We're not going to worry about it. It's nature at work. And so there it was, burning, and there's a road, there's a mountainside, fires on it, a road, and a river, and our campground. And so we didn't worry about it either. We went, hiked, and played, and came back that evening, and it looked like the fire was getting bigger. And we went down as the sun is starting to set. We went down to the road, and there's the ranger sitting there in a truck watching the fire burn, and a bunch of other people, and we sat there in our lawn chairs and watched the fire burn. And the ranger said, yeah, we're not worried about this, because even if this fire spreads, it can't get across the road and the river to get to the campground. You're fine. We're not going to shut anything down. We're not worried about this fire. We'll keep an eye on it. So we sat there and watched it like entertainment. And you'd watch a tree. It would suddenly go up in flames, and you would see the outline of the tree as it burned. And then another boom, boom, and you could hear the fire, too, from across the road up on the mountainside. And then a tree would succumb to the fire, and you would hear creaking and snapping as the tree fell and rolled down the mountain. So you had flames going up over the mountain, and you had flames falling down into the bottom of the mountain. So it was going both ways, spreading in both directions. It was scary. My fear, as we sat there watching it, my fear was this is going to ruin our vacation. This is going to ruin our vacation. We've only been here a day and a half. It's going to ruin things. We've scheduled a whole week. This is going to be awful. The next morning, the fears were realized. A ranger came to the camp, and we were just getting up and getting out of our tents, and it was snowing, but it wasn't snow, it was ash. And the ranger said, got to go. Pack up and get out, because we're closing down the campground. The campground's in danger at this point, so we're sending everybody out. So we packed out, and we could go west from there, or we could go east. We decided, let's go east. Let's find another campsite. We went east about 30 miles, found another campsite. We were pretty happy. Started setting up camp, but the skies changed again. And now there was a fire in the east. The Twisp River fire was moving our direction, and the sky went black again. And here we are in harm's way. And now we packed up our stuff, and we get in our little Dodge Grand Caravan, silver, and we start heading out. And as we're heading out, fire trucks are coming in by the dozens. I've never seen as many fire trucks, and they're coming in. And we're heading out, and it's getting darker and darker and darker, and smokier and smokier, and it was terrifying. And suddenly, my fear went from, it's going to ruin our vacation, to, are we even going to get out of this? Are we even going to escape? And we went through the little town of Twisp about 10 minutes after 4 firefighters, their truck went off the road, and the fire consumed their vehicle. 3 of the 4 were killed. You remember that story. One of them was a Whitman student. Awful situation. We went through that little town about 10, 15 minutes after that experience happened. Of course, we were unaware that that was going on. We were just trying to get out. Fears have a way of shifting. You were afraid of this, but the real danger was that, right? You're afraid that this is going to happen, but usually that first fear that we have is not the real fear. The real fear is what really could happen as a result of some of that. And so the disciples were afraid. And suddenly, verse 39, when Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly, the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. Who is this man? They're terrified. Who is this man? They asked each other, even the wind and waves obey him. Here's something that we need to just totally understand. God does not share our panic. God doesn't share our panic. But what if the stock market crashes? I think it did last week, didn't it? Something like that, I don't know. What if that politician wins and we feel a panic? What if the worst case scenario plays itself out and we feel a sense of panic? What if the tests come back and I get a terrible diagnosis and we panic? What if tragedy strikes the people that I love the most and we panic? What if the nightmare comes true and we panic? But God doesn't panic. He doesn't share our panic. Side note, the word panic comes from a Greek word. The Greek word is panikos. Panic. A sudden, overpowering fright that hits us. And oftentimes, when we're hit by that fright, we fight or flight, right? You either fight or you run. But panikos, this Greek word, comes from this story of the god Pan. Remember the god Pan, the Greek god Pan, who I think he was half goat, right? His bottom part was goat and his top part was people. Is that right? And he played a flute, remember? And he's god of this and that and the other thing, whatever he was. But one of the things that was attributed to the god Pan is he could scream, and his shriek was so terrifying that even giants would leave the battlefield and run for their lives out of panic, because he induced a panic in them, and they would run and shriek. So you will find in the course of your life a lot of things to be afraid of. You will. I will. Right? I mean, we will find times that we're terrified, near panic. And I don't want to make light of the troubles you're going to go through or the troubles that these disciples were in. They were in a boat, and the seas were worse than anything they'd experienced. And there they were that night, and they were frightened. And they were on the edge of complete panic. And Jesus asked them two questions. Suddenly, the water goes still, the wind stops blowing, the water goes still, and you hear dripping. And Jesus asked two questions. Why were you afraid? Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? Here's the thing about fear. It seems that the antidote for fear is faith. It's faith. It's the antidote. Do you still have no faith? Those are great questions. Those are great questions that, it seems like Jesus is basically saying, didn't you know I was here in the boat and God wouldn't let you die with me in the boat? It's almost like there's an incredible virtue had they just understood that Jesus was in the storm with them. If they had just only understood he's in the storm there with us, we'll be okay. If they had understood that they would be okay, they probably would have had fun. Here comes another one, Peter. Whoa. Right? Well, this one's going to tip us over. No, it's not. I mean, they could have probably, I don't know. I'm making light of it again. But armed with that knowledge, they might have been able to ride those waves and enjoyed the experience. What if instead of trying to convince God to panic and rush in and save us, we instead allowed the calm of Jesus to calm the storm that's in our soul? What if instead of saying, God, we're about to die, we said, God, still the storm that's in me. So they're terrified. A stillness falls over the weather. And the wind is gone and the waves are gone. What are they afraid of now? They're terrified. Probably the fact that they now understand for the first time that they'd seen Jesus do miracles, right? They'd seen him cast out demons, turn water into wine. They'd seen him do a bunch of stuff. But they'd never seen him speak to the wind and waves, and it went still. And they realized they are in the presence of the Son of the living God, the creator of the universe, and anything they fear doesn't matter. And there was a level of reverence that they could never have had until that moment happened. It was a new reverence, a greater reverence than they had ever known. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. One of my favorite songs says, peace be still, peace be still. The storm rages, peace be still. Storm is still going. Peace be still in me. So once you have seen God like that, like they saw him, they're almost like inoculated to fear now. Fear of other things, that is. They're just kind of inoculated to fear of all these dangers that are around them. So the boat lands. I'll close out the story. The boat lands on the other side of the shore. It's morning. And out, as the boat lands, out comes this demon-possessed man who is terrifying. In fact, this guy would scare the living everything out of us, because here's what happened. It's in Mark chapter 5, verse 3. This man lived in the burial caves and could no longer be restrained even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrists and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. This guy is horrifying. He's not the guy you want to run into in an alley at night, right? He's a scary guy. And so he comes running up to them. And do you know what the disciples did? Do you know what their response was? They weren't afraid. They weren't afraid because they had just seen Jesus calm the storm. And so this thing played out in front of them as Jesus talked to this man and cast out this legion of demons into pigs and all that stuff. It's an incredible story. But they were not afraid. Their fear was inoculated by faith. They were in the presence of a far more powerful being than all those demons. Philippians 2:12, last passage. We're told, therefore, dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. As we think of fear, there's this tension of fear and trust, and the two of them together. And I would encourage you, embrace the tension. Embrace the tension between fear and trust. Because when we embrace the tension, we're able to hold on. It takes tension to do anything. To hold a pen, there needs to be a tension to hold on to a pen. Because this finger pushes this way, that finger pushes that way. Without tension, it would just fall, right? So it takes tension. That tension helps us hold on to our faith. Now, I am not trying to scare anyone into following Jesus. It's not my intention. My greatest fear is life in the boat without him. My greatest fear is life in the minivan without him. My greatest fear is life in my family without him. My greatest fear is life without him and facing the storms and the demons of the world. Fear him, yes, but trust him at the same time. So maybe you want the opportunity to ask him into your life, or maybe do it again. And I'd invite you to pray this prayer with me. If you're like, you know what, I'm ready to trust, embrace that tension, and hold on to him, I would encourage you to pray this prayer after me, and pray it silently. You can close your eyes if you will. Pray this prayer. Jesus, I want to follow you. I believe you are the Son of God, and you died for my sins and rose from the dead to give me life. Help me make my life less about me and more about you. I confess my sins to you. You already know them. I ask you to forgive me and help me turn away from those lesser things and live for you. Help me learn to trust you and love you with all that I am. I confess you as the Lord of my life. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.